Employees at Zip2 would go home at night, come back, and find that Musk had changed their work without talking to them, and Musk's confrontational style did more harm than good. Yeah, we had some very good software engineers at Zip2, but I mean, I could code way better than them. And I'd just go in and fix their fucking code, Musk said. I would be frustrated waiting for their stuff, so I'm going to go and fix your code and now it runs 5 times faster, you idiot. There was one guy who wrote a quantum mechanics equation, a quantum probability on the board, and he got it wrong. I'm like, how can you write that? Then I corrected it for him. He hated me after that. Eventually, I realized, okay, I might have fixed that thing, but now I've made the person unproductive. It just wasn't a good way to go about things. Musk, the dot-com striver, had been both lucky and good. He had a decent idea, turned it into a real service, and came out of the dot-com tumult with cash in his pockets, which was better than what many of his compatriots could say. The process had been painful. Musk had yearned to be a leader, but the people around him struggled to see how Musk as the CEO could work. As far as Musk was concerned, they were all wrong, and he set out to prove his point with what would end up being even more dramatic results. 5. PayPal Mafia Boss. The sale of ZIP2 infused Elon Musk with a new brand of confidence. Much like the video game characters he adored, Musk had leveled up. He had solved Silicon Valley and become what everyone at the time wanted to be, a dot-com millionaire. His next venture would need to live up to his rapidly inflating ambition. This left Musk searching for an industry that had tons of money and inefficiencies that he and the internet could exploit. Musk began thinking back to his time as an intern at the Bank of Nova Scotia. His big takeaway from that job, that bankers are rich and dumb, now had the feel of a massive opportunity. During his time working for the head of strategy at the bank in the early 1990s, Musk had been asked to take a look at the company's third world debt portfolio. This pool of money went by the depressing name of less developed country debt, and Bank of Nova Scotia had billions of dollars of it. Countries throughout South America and elsewhere had defaulted in the years prior, forcing the bank to write down some of its debt value. Musk's boss wanted him to dig into the bank's holdings as a learning experiment and try to determine how much the debt was actually worth. While pursuing this project, Musk stumbled upon what seemed like an obvious business opportunity. The United States had tried to help reduce the debt burden of a number of developing countries through so-called Brady bonds, in which the US government basically backstopped the debt of countries like Brazil and Argentina. Musk noticed an arbitrage play. I calculated the backstop value, and it was something like 50 cents on the dollar, while the actual debt was trading at 25 cents, Musk said. This was like the biggest opportunity ever, and nobody seemed to realize it. Musk tried to remain cool and calm as he rang Goldman Sachs, one of the main traders in this market, and probed around about what he had seen. He inquired as to how much Brazilian debt might be available at the 25 cents price. The guy said, "How much do you want?" "And I came up with some ridiculous number like $10 billion, Musk said. When the trader confirmed that was doable, Musk hung up the phone. "I was thinking that they had to be fucking crazy because you could double your money. Everything was backed by Uncle Sam. It was a no-brainer." Musk had spent the summer earning about $14 an hour and getting chewed out for using the executive coffee machine, among other status infractions, and figured his moment to shine and make a big bonus had arrived. He sprinted up to his boss's office and pitched the opportunity of a lifetime. "You can make billions of dollars for free," he said. His boss told Musk to write up a report, which soon got passed up to the bank's CEO, who promptly rejected the proposal, saying the bank had been burned on Brazilian and Argentinian debt before and didn't want to mess with it again. "I tried to tell them that's not the point," Musk said. "The point is that it's fucking backed by Uncle Sam. It doesn't matter what the South Americans do. You cannot lose unless you think the US Treasury is going to default." But they still didn't do it, and I was stunned. Later in life, as I competed against the banks, I would think back to this moment, and it gave me confidence. All the bankers did was copy what everyone else did. If everyone else ran off a bloody cliff, they'd run right off a cliff with them. If there was a giant pile of gold sitting in the middle of the room and nobody was picking it up, they wouldn't pick it up either. In the years that followed, Musk considered starting an internet bank and discussed it openly during his internship at Pinnacle Research in 1995. The youthful Musk lectured the scientists about the inevitable transition coming in finance toward online systems, but they tried to talk him down, saying that it would take ages for web security to be good enough to win over consumers. Musk, though, remained convinced that the finance industry could do with a major upgrade and that he could have a big influence on banking with a relatively small investment. Money is low bandwidth, he said, during a speech at Stanford University in 2003, to describe his thinking. You don't need some sort of big infrastructure improvement to do things with it. It's really just an entry in a database. The actual plan that Musk concocted was beyond grandiose. As the researchers at Pinnacle had pointed out, people were barely comfortable buying books online. They might take their chances entering a credit card number, but exposing just their bank accounts to the web was out of the question to many. So what? Musk wanted to build a full-service financial institution online, a company that would have savings and checking accounts as well as brokerage services and insurance. The technology to build such a service was possible, but navigating the regulatory hell of creating an online bank from scratch looked like an intractable problem to optimists and an impossibility to more level heads. This was not dishing out directions to a pizzeria or putting up a house listing. It was dealing with people's finances, and there would be real repercussions if the service did not work as built. Undaunted, Musk kicked this new plan into action before Zip2 had even been sold. He chatted up some of the best engineers at the company to get a feel for who might be willing to join him in another venture. Musk also bounced his ideas off some contacts he'd made at the bank in Canada. In January 1999, with Zip2's board seeking a buyer, Musk began to formalize his banking plan. The deal with Compaq was announced the next month. And in March, Musk incorporated X.com, a finance startup with a pornographic-sounding name. It had taken Musk less than a decade to go from being a Canadian backpacker to becoming a multimillionaire at the age of 27. With his $22 million, he moved from sharing an apartment with 3 roommates to buying an 1,800 square foot condo and renovating it. He also bought a $1 million McLaren F1 sports car and a small prop plane and learned to fly. Musk embraced the newfound celebrity that he'd earned as part of the dot-com millionaire set. He let CNN show up at his apartment at 7 a.m. to film the delivery of the car. A black 18-wheeler pulled up in front of Musk's place and then lowered the sleek sliver vehicle onto the street while Musk stood slack-jawed with his arms folded. There are 62 McLarens in the world, and I will own one of them, he told CNN. Wow, I can't believe it's actually here. That's pretty wild, man. CNN interspersed video of the car delivery with interviews with Musk. The whole time he looked like a caricature of an engineer who had made it big. Musk's hair had started thinning, and he had a closely cropped cut that accentuated his boyish face. He wore an all-too-big brown sport coat and checked his cell phone from his lavish car, sitting next to his gorgeous girlfriend, Justine, and he seemed spellbound by his life. Musk rolled out one laughable rich guy line after another, talking first about the Zip2 deal, receiving cash is cash. I mean, those are just a large number of Ben Franklin's. Next about the awesomeness of his life, there it is, gentlemen, the fastest car in the world, and then about his prodigious ambition. I could go and buy one of the islands in the Bahamas and turn it into my personal fiefdom, but I am much more interested in trying to build and create a new company. The camera crew followed Musk to the X.com offices, where his cockshow delivery led to another round of cringe-worthy statements. I do not fit the picture of a banker. Raising $50 million is a matter of making a series of phone calls, and the money is there. I think X.com could absolutely be a multi-billion-dollar bonanza. Musk purchased the McLaren from a seller in Florida, snatching the car away from Ralph Lauren, who had also inquired about buying it. Even very wealthy people like Lauren would tend to reserve something like a McLaren for special events or the occasional Sunday drive. Not Musk. He drove it all around Silicon Valley and parked it on the street by the X.com officers. His friends were horrified to see such a work of art covered with bird droppings or in the parking lot of a Safeway. One day, Musk emailed fellow McLaren owner Larry Ellison, the billionaire co-founder of the software maker Oracle, out of the blue to see if he wanted to go race cars around a track for fun. Jim Clark, another billionaire who liked fast things, caught wind of the proposal and told a friend that he needed to rush over to the local Ferrari dealership to buy something that could compete. Musk had joined the big boys club. Elon was super excited about all of this, said George Zachary, a venture capitalist and close friend of Musk's. He showed me the correspondence with Larry. The next year, while driving down Sand Hill Road to meet with an investor, Musk turned to a friend in the car and said, "Watch this." He floored the car, did a lane change, spun out, and hit an embankment, which started the car spinning in midair like a frisbee. The windows and wheels were blown to smithereens, and the body of the car damaged. Musk again turned to his companion and said, "The funny part is it wasn't insured." The two of them then thumbed a ride to the venture capitalist's office. To his credit, Musk did not fully buy into this playboy persona. He actually plowed the majority of the money he made from Zip2 into X.com. There were practical reasons for this decision. Investors catch a break under the tax law if they roll a windfall into a new venture within a couple of months. But even by Silicon Valley's high-risk standards, it was shocking to put so much of one's newfound wealth into something as iffy as an online bank. All told, Musk invested about $12 million into X.com, leaving him, after taxes, with $4 million or so for personal use. "That's part of what separates Elon from mere mortals," said Ed Ho, the former Zip2 executive who went on to co-found X.com. "He's willing to take an insane amount of personal risk. When you do a deal like that, it either pays off or you end up in a bus shelter somewhere." Musk's decision to invest so much money in X.com looks even more unusual in hindsight. Much of the point of being a dot-com success in 1999 was to prove yourself once, stash away your millions, and then use your credentials to talk other people into betting their money on your next venture. Musk would certainly go on to rely on outside investors, but he put major skin in the game as well. So while Musk could be found on television talking like the rest of the self-absorbed dot-com shummicks, he behaved more like a throwback to Silicon Valley's earlier days, when the founders of companies like Intel were willing to take huge gambles on themselves. Where Zip2 had been a neat, useful idea, X.com held the promise of fomenting a major revolution. Musk, for the first time, would be confronting a deep-pocketed, entrenched industry head-on with the hopes of upending all of the incumbents. Musk also began to hone his trademark style of entering an ultra-complex business and not letting the fact that he knew very little about the industry's nuances bother him in the slightest. He had an inkling that the bankers were doing finance all wrong and that he could run the business better than everyone else. Musk's ego and confidence had started heading toward the levels that would inspire some and leave others thinking of him as pompous and unscrupulous. The creation of X.com would ultimately reveal a great deal about Musk's creativity, relentless drive, confrontational style, and foibles as a leader. Musk would also get another taste of being pushed aside at his own company and the pain that accompanies a grand vision left unfulfilled. Musk assembled what looked like an all-star crew to start X.com. Ho had worked at SGI and Zip2 as an engineer, and his peers marveled at his coding and team management skills. They were joined by a pair of Canadians with finance experience, Harris Fricker and Christopher Payne. Musk had met Fricker during his time as an intern at the Bank of Nova Scotia, and the two really hit it off. A Rhodes Scholar, Fricker brought the knowledge of the banking world's mechanics that X.com would need. Payne was Fricker's friend from the Canadian finance community. All four men were considered co-founders of the company, while Musk emerged as the largest shareholder thanks to his hefty upfront investment. X.com began, like so many Silicon Valley operations, at a house where the co-founders began brainstorming, and then moved to more formal offices at 394 University Avenue in Palo Alto. The co-founders were aligned philosophically around the idea that the banking industry had fallen behind the times. Visiting a branch bank to speak with a teller seemed pretty archaic now that the internet had arrived. The rhetoric sounded good, and the four men were enthused. The only thing stopping them was reality. Musk had a modicum of banking experience and had resorted to buying a book on the industry to help understand its inner workings. The more the co-founders thought about their plan of attack, the more they realized the regulatory issues blocking the creation of an online bank were insurmountable. As 4 and 5 months went by, the onion just kept unwrapping, said Ho. Asterisk. From the outset, there were personality clashes as well. Musk had become a budding superstar in Silicon Valley and had the press fawning over him. This didn't sit that well with Fricker, who'd moved from Canada and pegged X.com as his chance to make a mark on the world as a banking whiz. Fricker, according to numerous people, wanted to run X.com and do so in a more conventional manner. He found Musk's visionary statements to the press about rethinking the entire banking industry silly since the company was struggling to build much of anything. We were out promising the sun, moon, and the stars to the media, Fricker said. Elon would say that this is not a normal business environment, and you have to suspend normal business thinking. He said, there is a happy gas factory up on the hill, and it's pumping stuff into the valley. Fricker would not be the last person to accuse Musk of overhyping products and playing the public, although whether this is a flaw or one of Musk's great talents as a businessman is up for debate. The squabble between Fricker and Musk came to a quick, nasty end. Just 5 months after X.com had started, Fricker initiated a coup. He said either he takes over as CEO or he's just going to take everyone from the company and create his own company, Musk said. I don't do well with blackmail. I said, you should go do that. So he did. Musk tried to talk Ho and some of the other key engineers into staying, but they sided with Fricker and left. Musk ended up with a shell of a company and a handful of loyal employees. After all that went down, I remember sitting with Elon in his office, said Julie Ankenbrandt, an early X.com employee who stayed. There were a million laws in place to block something like X.com from happening, but Elon didn't care. He just looked at me and said, I guess we should hire some more people. Asterisk. Musk had been trying to raise funding for X.com and had been forced to go to venture capitalists and confess that there wasn't much in the way of a company left. Mike Moritz, a famed investor from Sequoia Capital, backed the company nonetheless, making a bet on Musk and little else. Musk hit the streets of Silicon Valley once again and managed to attract engineers with his rah-rah speeches about the future of internet banking. Scott Anderson, a young computer scientist, started on August 1, 1999, just a few days after the exodus, and bought right into the vision. You look back, and it was total insanity, Anderson said. We had what amounted to a Hollywood movie set of a website. It barely got past the VCs. Week by week, more engineers arrived and the vision became more real. The company secured a banking license and a mutual fund license and formed a partnership with Barclays. By November, XCOM's small software team had created one of the world's first online banks, complete with FDIC insurance to back the bank accounts and 3 mutual funds for investors to choose. Musk gave the engineers $100,000 of his own money to conduct their testing. On the night before Thanksgiving in 1999, X.com went live to the public. I was there until 2 a.m., Anderson said. Then, I went home to cook Thanksgiving dinner. Elon called me a few hours later and asked me to come into the office to relieve some of the other engineers. Elon stayed there 48 straight hours, making sure things worked. Under Musk's direction, X.com tried out some radical banking concepts. Customers received a $20 cash card just for signing up to use the service and a $10 card for every person they referred. Musk did away with niggling fees and overdraft penalties. In a very modern twist, X.com also built a person-to-person payment system in which you could send someone money just by plugging their email address into the site. The whole idea was to shift away from slow-moving banks with their mainframes taking days to process payments and to create a kind of agile bank account where you could move money around with a couple of clicks on a mouse or an email. This was revolutionary stuff, and more than 200,000 people bought into it and signed up for X.com within the first couple of months of operation. Soon enough, X.com had a major competitor. A couple of brainy kids named Max Levchin and Peter Thiel had been working on a payment system of their own at their startup called Confinity. The duo actually rented their office space, a glorified broom closet, from X.com and were trying to make it possible for owners of Palm Pilot handhelds to swap money via the infrared ports on the devices. Between X.com and Confinity, the small office on University Avenue had turned into the frenzied epicenter of the internet finance revolution. It was this mass of adolescent men that worked so hard, Ankenbrandt said. It stunk so badly in there. I can still smell it, leftover pizza, body odor, and sweat. The pleasantries between X.com and Confinity came to an abrupt end. The Confinity founders moved to an office down the street and, like X.com, began focusing their attention on web and email-based payments with their service known as PayPal. The companies became locked in a heated battle to match each other's features and attract more users, knowing that whoever got bigger faster would win. Tens of millions of dollars were spent on promotions, while millions more were lost battling hackers who had seized upon the services as new playgrounds for fraud. It was like the internet version of making it rain at a strip club, said Jeremy Stoppelman, an X.com engineer who went on to become the CEO of Yelp. You gave away money as fast as you could. The race to win internet payments gave Musk a chance to show off his quick thinking and work ethic. He kept devising plans to counter the advantage PayPal had established on auction sites like eBay. And he rallied the X.com employees to implement the tactics as fast as possible using brute force appeals to their competitive natures. There really wasn't anything suave about him, Ankenbrand said. We all worked 20 hours a day, and he worked 23 hours. In March 2000, X.com and Confinity finally decided to stop trying to spend each other into oblivion and to join forces. Confinity had what looked like the hottest product in PayPal but was paying out $100,000 a day in awards to new customers and didn't have the cash reserves to keep going. X.com, by contrast, still had plenty of cash reserves and the more sophisticated banking products. It took the lead in setting the merger terms, leaving Musk as the largest shareholder of the combined company, which would be called X.com. Shortly after the deal closed, X.com raised $100 million from backers including Deutsche Bank and Goldman Sachs and boasted that it had more than 1 million customers. Asterisk. The two companies tried hard to mesh their cultures, with modest success. Groups of employees from X.com tied their computer monitors to their desk chairs with power cords and rolled them down the street to the Confinity offices to work alongside their new colleagues. But the teams could never quite see eye to eye. Musk kept championing the X.com brand, while most everyone else favored PayPal. More fights broke out over the design of the company's technology infrastructure. The Confinity team led by Levchin favored moving toward open-source software like Linux, while Musk championed Microsoft's data center software as being more likely to keep productivity high. The squabble may sound silly to outsiders, but it was the equivalent of a religious war to the engineers, many of whom viewed Microsoft as a dated evil empire and Linux as the modern software of the people. 2 months after the merger, Thiel resigned and Levchin threatened to walk out over the technology rift. Musk was left to run a fractured company. The technology issues X.com had been facing worsened as the computing systems failed to keep up with an exploding customer base. Once a week, the company's website collapsed. Most of the engineers were ordered to start work designing a new system, which distracted key technical personnel and left X.com vulnerable to fraud. We were losing money hand over fist, said Stoppelman. As X.com became more popular and its transaction volume exploded, all of its problems worsened. There was more fraud. There were more fees from banks and credit card companies. There was more competition from startups. X.com lacked a cohesive business model to offset the losses and turn a profit from the money it managed. Roelof Botha, the Startups' chief financial officer and now a prominent venture capitalist at Sequoia, did not think Musk provided the board with a true picture of X.com's issues. A growing number of other people at the company questioned Musk's decision-making in the face of all the crises. What followed was one of the nastiest coups in Silicon Valley's long, illustrious history of nasty coups. A small group of X.com employees gathered one night at Fannie and Alexander, a now defunct bar in Palo Alto, and brainstormed about how to push out Musk. They decided to sell the board on the idea of Thiel returning as CEO. Instead of confronting Musk directly with this plan, the conspirators decided to take action behind Musk's back. Musk and Justine had been married in January 2000 but had been too busy for honeymoon. 9 months later, in September, they planned to mix business and pleasure by going on a fundraising trip and ending it with a honeymoon in Sydney to catch the Olympics. As they boarded their flight one night, X.com executives delivered letters of no confidence to X.com's board. Some of the people loyal to Musk had sensed something was wrong, but it was too late. I went to the office at 10:30 that night, and everyone was there, Ankenbrand said. I could not believe it. I am frantically trying to call Elon, but he's on a plane. By the time he landed, Musk had been replaced by Thiel. When Musk finally heard what had happened, he hopped on the next plane back to Palo Alto. It was shocking, but I will give Elon this, I thought he handled it pretty well, Justine said. For a brief period, Musk tried to fight back. He urged the board to reconsider its decision. But when it became clear that the company had already moved on, Musk relented. I talked to Moritz and a few others, Musk said. It wasn't so much that I wanted to be CEO but more like, hey, I think there are some pretty important things that need to happen, and if I'm not CEO, I'm not sure they are going to happen. But then I talked to Max and Peter, and it seemed like they would make these things happen. So then, I mean, it's not the end of the world. Many of the X.com employees who had been with Musk since early on were less than impressed by what had happened. I was floored by it and angry, said Stoppelman. Elon was sort of a rock star in my view. I was very vocal about how I thought it was bullshit. But I knew fundamentally that the company was doing well. It was a rocket ship, and I wasn't going to leave. Stoppelman, then 23, went into a conference room and tore into Thiel and Levchin. They let me vent it all out, and their reaction was part of the reason I stayed. Others remained embittered. It was backhanded and cowardly, said Brandon Spikes, a Zip2 and X.com engineer. I would have been more behind it if Elon had been in the room. By June 2001, Musk's influence on the company was fading quickly. That month, Thiel rebranded X.com as PayPal. Musk rarely lets a slight go unpunished. Throughout this ordeal, however, he showed incredible restraint. He embraced the role of being an advisor to the company and kept investing in it, increasing his stake as PayPal's largest shareholder. You would expect someone in Elon's position to be bitter and vindictive, but he wasn't, said Boter. He supported Peter. He was a prince. The next few months would end up being key for Musk's future. The dot-com joyride was coming to a quick end, and people wanted to try to cash out in any way possible. When executives from eBay began approaching PayPal about an acquisition, the inclination for most people was to sell and sell fast. Musk and Moritz, though, urged the board to reject a number of offers and hold out for more money. PayPal had revenue of about $240 million per year, and looked like it might make it as an independent company and go public. Musk and Moritz's resistance paid off and then some. In July 2002, eBay offered $1.5 billion for PayPal, and Musk and the rest of the board accepted the deal. Musk netted about $250 million from the sale to eBay, or $180 million after taxes, enough to make what would turn out to be his very wild dreams possible. The PayPal episode was a mixed bag for Musk. His reputation as a leader suffered in the aftermath of the deal, and the media turned on him in earnest for the first time. Eric Jackson, an early Confinity employee, wrote The PayPal Wars, Battles with eBay, the Media, the Mafia, and the Rest of Planet Earth in 2004 and recounted the company's tumultuous journey. The book painted Musk as an egomaniacal, stubborn jerk, making wrong decisions at every turn, and portrayed Thiel and Levchin as heroic geniuses. Valleywag, the technology industry gossip site, piled on as well and turned bashing Musk into one of its pet projects. The criticisms grew to the point that people started wondering aloud whether or not Musk counted as a true co-founder of PayPal or had just ridden Thiel's coattails to a magical payday. The tone of the book along with the blog posts goaded Musk in 2007 into writing a 2,200-word email to Valleywag meant to set the record straight with his version of events. In the email, Musk let his literary flair loose and gave the public a direct look at his combative side. He described Jackson as a sycophantic jackass, and one notch above an intern, who had little insight into the high-level goings-on at the company. Since Eric worships Peter, the outcome was obvious. Peter sounds like Mel Gibson in Braveheart and my role is somewhere between negligible and a bad seed, Musk wrote. Musk then detailed 7 reasons why he deserved co-founder status of PayPal, including his role as its largest shareholder, the hiring of a lot of the top talent, the creation of a number of the company's most successful business ideas, and his time as CEO when the company went from 60 to several hundred employees. Almost everyone I interviewed from the PayPal days leaned toward agreeing with Musk's overall assessment. They said that Jackson's account bordered on fantasy when it came to celebrating the Confinity team over Musk and the X.com team. There are a lot of PayPal people that suffer from warped memories, said Boter. But these same people reached another consensus, saying that Musk had mishandled the branding, technology infrastructure, and fraud situations. I think it would have killed the company if Elon had stayed on as CEO for 6 more months, said Boter. The mistakes Elon was making at the time were amplifying the risk of the business. For more on Musk's take on the PayPal years, see Appendix 2. The suggestions that Musk did not count as a true co-founder of PayPal seem asinine in retrospect. Thiel, Levchin, and other PayPal executives have said as much in the years since the eBay deal closed. The only useful thing such criticisms produced were the bombastic counteroffensives from Musk, which revealed touches of insecurity and the seriousness with which Musk insists that the historical record reflect his take on events. He comes from the school of thought in the public relations world that you let no inaccuracy go uncorrected, said Vince Solito, the former communications chief at PayPal. It sets a precedent, and you should fight every out of place, tooth and nail. He takes things very personally and usually seeks war. The stronger critique of Musk during this period of his life was that he had succeeded to a large degree despite himself. Musk's traits as a confrontational know-it-all and his abundant ego created deep, lasting fractures within his companies. While Musk consciously tried to temper his behavior, these efforts were not enough to win over investors and more experienced executives. At both Zip2 and PayPal, the company's boards came to the conclusion that Musk was not yet CEO material. It can also be argued that Musk had become a hyperbolic huckster who overreached and oversold his company's technology. Musk's biggest detractors have made all of these arguments either in public or private, and a half dozen or so of them said far worse things to me about his character and actions, describing Musk as unethical in business and vicious with his personal attacks. Almost universally, these people were unwilling to go on the record with their comments, claiming to be afraid Musk would pursue litigation against them or ruin their ability to do business. These criticisms must be weighed against Musk's track record. He demonstrated an innate ability to read people and technology trends at the inception of the consumer web. While others tried to wrap their heads around the internet's implications, Musk had already set off on a purposeful plan of attack. He envisioned many of the early pieces of technology, directories, maps, sites that focused on vertical markets that would become mainstays on the web. Then, just as people became comfortable with buying things from Amazon.com and eBay, Musk made the great leap forward to full-fledged internet banking. He would bring standard financial instruments online and then modernize the industry with a host of new concepts. He exhibited a deep insight into human nature that helped his companies pull off exceptional marketing, technology, and financial feats. Musk was already playing the entrepreneur game at the highest level and working the press and investors like few others could. Did he hype things up and rub people the wrong way? Absolutely, and with spectacular results. Based in large part on Musk's guidance, PayPal survived the bursting of the dot-com bubble, became the first blockbuster IPO after the 9/11 attacks, and then sold to eBay for an astronomical sum while the rest of the technology industry was mired in a dramatic downturn. It was nearly impossible to survive, let alone emerge as a winner in the midst of such a mess. PayPal also came to represent one of the greatest assemblages of business and engineering talent in Silicon Valley history. Both Musk and Thiel had a keen eye for young, brilliant engineers. The founders of startups as varied as YouTube, Palantir Technologies, and Yelp all worked at PayPal. Another set of people, including Reid Hoffman, Thiel, and Boter, emerged as some of the technology industry's top investors. PayPal staff pioneered techniques in fighting online fraud that have formed the basis of software used by the CIA and FBI to track terrorists and of software used by the world's largest banks to combat crime. This collection of super bright employees has become known as the PayPal Mafia, more or less the current ruling class of Silicon Valley, and Musk is its most famous and successful member. Hindsight also continues to favor Musk's unbridled vision over the more cautious pragmatism of executives at Zip2 and PayPal. Had it chased consumers as Musk urged, Zip the 2nd of May have ended up as a blockbuster mapping and review service. As for PayPal, an argument can still be made that the investors sold out too early and should have listened more to Musk's demands to remain independent. By 2014, PayPal had amassed 153 million users and was valued at close to $32 billion as a standalone company. A flood of payment and banking startups have appeared as well, Square, Stripe, and Simple, to name three among the S's that have looked to fulfill much of the original X.com vision. If X.com's board had been a bit more patient with Musk, there's good reason to believe he would have succeeded with delivery of the online bank to rule them all that he had set out to create. History has demonstrated that while Musk's goals can sound absurd in the moment, he certainly believes in them and, when given enough time, tends to achieve them. He always works from a different understanding of reality than the rest of us, Ankenbrand said. He is just different than the rest of us. While navigating the business tumult of Zip2 and PayPal, Musk found a moment of peace in his personal life. He'd spent years courting Justine Wilson from afar, flying her out for visits on the weekends. For a long time, his oppressive hours and his roommates put a crimp on the relationship. But the Zip2 sale let Musk buy a place of his own and pay a bit more attention to Justine. Like any couple, they had their ups and downs, but that passion of young love remained. We fought a lot, but when we weren't fighting, there was a deep sense of compassion, a bond, Justine said. The couple had been sparring for a few days about phone calls Justine kept getting from an ex-boyfriend. Elon didn't like that, and had a major spat while walking near the X.com offices. I remember thinking it was a lot of drama, and that if I was going to put up with it, we might as well be married. I told him he should just propose to me, Justine said. It took Musk a few minutes to cool down and then he did just that, proposing on the spot. A few days later, a more chivalrous Musk returned to the sidewalk, got down on bended knee, and presented Justine with a ring. Justine knew all about Musk's grim childhood and the intense range of emotions he could exhibit. Her romantic sensibilities overrode any trepidation she might have had about these parts of Musk's history and character and centered instead on his strength. Musk often talked fondly about Alexander the Great, and Justine saw him as her own conquering hero. He wasn't afraid of responsibility, she said. He didn't run from things. He wanted to get married and have kids early on. Musk also exuded a confidence and passion that made Justine think life with him would always be okay. Money is not his motivation, and, quite frankly, I think it just happens for him, Justine said. It's just there. He knows he can generate it. At their wedding reception, Justine encountered the other side of the conquering hero. Musk pulled Justine close while they danced, and informed her, I am the alpha in this relationship. 2 months later, Justine signed a postnuptial financial agreement that would come back to haunt her and entered into an enduring power struggle. She described the situation years later in an article for Marie Claire, writing, he was constantly remarking on the ways he found me lacking. I am your wife, I told him repeatedly, not your employee. If you were my employee, he said just as often, I would fire you. The newlyweds were not helped by the drama at X.com. They'd put off their honeymoon and then had it derailed by the coup. It took until late December 2000 for things to calm down enough for Musk to take his first vacation in years. He arranged a 2-week trip, with the first part taking place in Brazil and the second in South Africa at a game reserve near the Mozambique border. While in Africa, Musk contracted the most virulent version of malaria, falciparum malaria, which accounts for the vast majority of malaria deaths. Musk returned to California in January, which is when the illness took hold. He started to get sick and was bedridden for a few days before Justine took him to a doctor who then ordered that Musk be rushed in an ambulance to Sequoia Hospital in Redwood City. Doctors there misdiagnosed and mistreated his condition to the point that Musk was near death. Then, there happened to be a guy visiting from another hospital who had seen a lot more malaria cases, Musk said. He spied Musk's blood work in the lab and ordered an immediate maximum dosage of doxycycline, an antibiotic. The doctor told Musk that if he had turned up a day later, the medicine likely would no longer have been effective. Musk spent 10 agonizing days in the intensive care unit. The experience shocked Justine. He's built like a tank, she said. He has a level of stamina and an ability to deal with levels of stress that I've never seen in anyone else. To see him laid low like that in total misery was like a visit to an alternate universe. It took Musk 6 months to recover. He lost 45 pounds over the course of the illness and had a closet full of clothes that no longer fit. I came very close to dying, Musk said. That's my lesson for taking a vacation. Vacations will kill you. 6. Mice in space. Elon Musk turned 30 in June 2001, and the birthday hit him hard. I'm no longer a child prodigy, he told Justine, only half joking. That same month, X.com officially changed its name to PayPal, providing a harsh reminder that the company had been ripped away from Musk and given to someone else to run. The startup life, which Musk described as akin to eating glass and staring into the abyss, had gotten old, and so had Silicon Valley. It felt like Musk was living inside a trade show where everyone worked in the technology industry and talked all the time about funding, IPOs, and chasing big paydays. People liked to brag about the crazy hours they worked, and Justine would just laugh, knowing Musk had lived a more extreme version of the Silicon Valley lifestyle than they could imagine. I had friends who complained that their husbands came home at 7 or 8, she said. Elon would come home at 11 and work some more. People didn't always get the sacrifice he made in order to be where he was. The idea of escaping this incredibly lucrative rat race started to grow more and more appealing. Musk's entire life had been about chasing a bigger stage, and Palo Alto seemed more like a stepping stone than a final destination. The couple decided to move south and begin their family and the next chapter of their lives in Los Angeles. There's an element to him that likes the style and the excitement and color of a place like LA, said Justine. Elon likes to be where the action is. A small group of Musk's friends who felt similarly had also decamped to Los Angeles for what would be a wild couple of years. It wasn't just Los Angeles' glitz and grandeur that attracted Musk. It was also the call of space. After being pushed out of PayPal, Musk had started to revisit his childhood fantasies around rocket ships and space travel, and to think that he might have a greater calling than creating internet services. The changes in his attitude and thinking soon became obvious to his friends, including a group of PayPal executives who had gathered in Las Vegas one weekend to celebrate the company's success. "We're all hanging out in this cabana at the Hard Rock Cafe, and Elon is there reading some obscure Soviet rocket manual that was all moldy and looked like it had been bought on eBay," said Kevin Hartz, an early PayPal investor. He was studying it and talking openly about space travel and changing the world. Musk had picked Los Angeles with intent. It gave him access to space, or at least the space industry. Southern California's mild, consistent weather had made it a favored city of the aeronautics industry since the 1920s, when the Lockheed Aircraft Company set up shop in Hollywood. Howard Hughes, the U.S. Air Force, NASA, Boeing, and myriad other people and organizations have performed much of their manufacturing and cutting-edge experimentation in and around Los Angeles. Today the city remains a major hub for the military's aeronautics work and commercial activity. While Musk didn't know exactly what he wanted to do in space, he realized that just by being in Los Angeles he would be surrounded by the world's top aeronautics thinkers. They could help him refine any ideas, and there would be plenty of recruits to join his next venture. Musk's first interactions with the aeronautics community were with an eclectic collection of space enthusiasts, members of a non-profit group called the Mars Society. Dedicated to exploring and settling the Red Planet, the Mars Society planned to hold a fundraiser in mid-2001. The $500 per plate event was to take place at the house of one of the well-off Mars Society members, and invitations to the usual characters had been mailed out. What stunned Robert Zubrin, the head of the group, was the reply from someone named Elon Musk, whom no one could remember inviting. "He gave us a check for $5,000, Zubrin said. That made everyone take notice. Zubrin began researching Musk, determined he was rich, and invited him for coffee ahead of the dinner. "I wanted to make sure he knew the projects we had underway," Zubrin said. He proceeded to regale Musk with tales of the research center the society had built in the Arctic to mimic the tough conditions of Mars, and the experiments they had been running for something called the Translife mission, in which there would be a spinning capsule orbiting Earth that was piloted by a crew of mice. It would spin to give them 1/3 gravity, the same you would have on Mars, and they would live there and reproduce, Zubrin told Musk. When it was time for dinner, Zubrin placed Musk at the VIP table next to himself, the director and space buff James Cameron, and Carol Stoker, a planetary scientist for NASA with a deep interest in Mars. "Elon is so youthful looking, and at that time he looked like a little boy," Stoker said. Cameron was chatting him up right away to invest in his next movie, and Zubrin was trying to get him to make a big donation to the Mars Society. In return for being hounded for cash, Musk probed about for ideas and contacts. Stoker's husband was an aerospace engineer at NASA working on a concept for an airplane that would glide over Mars looking for water. Musk loved that. He was much more intense than some of the other millionaires, Zubran said. He didn't know a lot about space, but he had a scientific mind. He wanted to know exactly what was being planned in regards to Mars and what the significance would be. Musk took to the Mars Society right away and joined its board of directors. He donated another $100,000 to fund a research station in the desert as well. Musk's friends were not entirely sure what to make of his mental state. He'd lost a tremendous amount of weight fighting off malaria and looked almost skeletal. With little prompting, Musk would start expounding on his desire to do something meaningful with his life, something lasting. His next move had to be either in solar or in space. He said, "The logical thing to happen next is solar, but I can't figure out how to make any money out of it," said George Zachary, the investor and close friend of Musk's, recalling a lunch date at the time. Then he started talking about space, and I thought he meant office space like a real estate play. Musk had actually started thinking bigger than the Mars Society. Rather than send a few mice into Earth's orbit, Musk wanted to send them to Mars. Some very rough calculations done at the time suggested that the journey would cost $15 million. He asked if I thought that was crazy, Zachary said. I asked, do the mice come back? Because, if they don't, yeah, most people will think that's crazy. As it turned out, the mice were not only meant to go to Mars and come back but were also meant to procreate along the way, during a journey that would take months. Jeff Skoll, another one of Musk's friends who made a fortune at eBay, pointed out that the fornicating mice would need a hell of a lot of cheese and bought Musk a giant wheel of Le Bras, a type of Gruyere. Musk did not mind becoming the butt of cheese jokes. The more he thought about space, the more important its exploration seemed to him. He felt as if the public had lost some of its ambition and hope for the future. The average person might see space exploration as a waste of time and effort and rib him for talking about the subject, but Musk thought about interplanetary travel in a very earnest way. He wanted to inspire the masses and reinvigorate their passion for science, conquest, and the promise of technology. His fears that mankind had lost much of its will to push the boundaries were reinforced one day when Musk went to the NASA website. He'd expected to find a detailed plan for exploring Mars and instead found bookers. At first I thought, geez, maybe I'm just looking in the wrong place, Musk once told Wired. Why was there no plan, no schedule? There was nothing. It seemed crazy. Musk believed that the very idea of America was intertwined with humanity's desire to explore. He found it sad that the American agency tasked with doing audacious things in space and exploring new frontiers as its mission seemed to have no serious interest in investigating Mars at all. The spirit of manifest destiny had been deflated or maybe even come to a depressing end, and hardly anyone seemed to care. Like so many quests to revitalize America's soul and bring hope to all of mankind, Musk's journey began in a hotel conference room. By this time, Musk had built up a decent network of contacts in the space industry, and he brought the best of them together at a series of salons, sometimes at the Renaissance Hotel at the Los Angeles airport and sometimes at the Sheraton Hotel in Palo Alto. Musk had no formal business plan for these people to debate. He mostly wanted them to help him develop the mice to Mars idea, or at least to come up with something comparable. Musk hoped to hit on a grand gesture for mankind, some type of event that would capture the world's attention, get people thinking about Mars again, and have them reflect on man's potential. The scientists and luminaries at the meetings were to figure out a spectacle that would be technically feasible at a price tag of approximately $20 million. Musk resigned from his position as a director of the Mars Society and announced his own organization, the Life to Mars Foundation. The collection of talent attending these sessions in 2001 was impressive. Scientists showed up from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL. James Cameron appeared, lending some celebrity to the affair. Also attending was Michael Griffin, whose academic credentials were spectacular and included degrees in aerospace engineering, electrical engineering, civil engineering, and applied physics. Griffin had worked for the CIA's venture capital arm called In-Q-Tel, at NASA, and at JPL, and was just in the process of leaving Orbital Sciences Corporation, a maker of satellites and spacecraft, where he had been chief technical officer and the general manager of the Space Systems Group. It could be argued that no one on the planet knew more about the realities of getting things into space than Griffin, and he was working for Musk as space thinker-in-chief. 4 years later, in 2005, Griffin took over as head of NASA. The experts were thrilled to have another rich guy appear who was willing to fund something interesting in space. They happily debated the merits and feasibility of sending up rodents and watching them hump. But, as the discussion wore on, a consensus started to build around pursuing a different project, something called Mars Oasis. Under this plan, Musk would buy a rocket and use it to shoot what amounted to a robotic greenhouse to Mars. A group of researchers had already been working on a space-ready growth chamber for plants. The idea was to modify their structure, so that it could open up briefly and suck in some of the Martian regolith, or soil, and then use it to grow a plant which would in turn produce the first oxygen on Mars. Much to Musk's liking, this new plan seemed both ostentatious and feasible. Musk wanted the structure to have a window and a way to send a video feed back to Earth so that people could watch the plant grow. The group also talked about sending out kits to students around the country who would grow their own plants simultaneously and take notice, for example, that the Martian plant could grow twice as high as its Earth-bound counterpart in the same amount of time. This concept had been floating around in various forms for a while, said Dave Bearden, a space industry veteran who attended the meetings. It would be, yes, there is life on Mars, and we put it there. The hope was that it might turn on a light for thousands of kids that this place is not that hostile. Then they might start thinking, maybe we should go there. Musk's enthusiasm for the idea started to inspire the group, many of whom had grown cynical about anything novel happening in space again. He's a very smart, very driven guy with a huge ego, Bearden said. At one point someone mentioned that he might become Time magazine's Man of the Year, and you could see him light up. He has this belief that he is the guy who can change the world. The main thing troubling the space experts was Musk's budget. Following the salons, it seemed like Musk wanted to spend somewhere between $20 million and $30 million on the stunt, and everyone knew that the cost of a rocket launch alone would eat up that money and then some. In my mind, you needed $200 million to do it right, Bearden said. But people were reluctant to bring too much reality into the situation too early and just get the whole idea killed. Then there were the immense engineering challenges that would need solving. To have a big window on this thing was a real thermal problem, Bearden said. You could not keep the container warm enough to keep anything alive. Scooping Martian soil into the structure seemed not only hard to do physically but also like a flat-out bad idea since the regolith would be toxic. For a while, the scientists debated growing the plant in a nutrient-rich gel instead, but that felt like cheating and like it might undermine the whole point of the endeavor. Even the optimistic moments were awash in unknowns. One scientist found some very resilient mustard seeds and thought they could possibly survive a treated version of the Martian soil. There was a pretty big downside if the plant didn't survive, Bearden said. You have this dead garden on Mars that ends up giving off the opposite of the intended effect. Asterisk. Musk never flinched. He turned some of the volunteer thinkers into consultants, and put them to work on the plant machine's design. He also plotted a trip to Russia to find out exactly how much a launch would cost. Musk intended to buy a refurbished intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, from the Russians and use that as his launch vehicle. For help with this, Musk reached out to Jim Cantrell, an unusual fellow who had done a mix of classified and unclassified work for the United States and other governments. Among other claims to fame, Cantrell had been accused of espionage and placed under house arrest in 1996 by the Russians after a satellite deal went awry. After a couple of weeks, Al Gore made some calls, and it got worked out, Cantrell said. I didn't want anything to do with the Russians again, ever. Musk had other ideas. Cantrell was driving his convertible on a hot July evening in Utah when a call came in. This guy in a funny accent said, I really need to talk to you. I am a billionaire. I am going to start a space program. Cantrell could not hear Musk well. He thought his name was Elon Musk, and said he would call back once he got home. The two men didn't exactly trust each other at the outset. Musk refused to give Cantrell his cell phone number and made the call from his fax machine. Cantrell found Musk both intriguing and all too eager. He asked if there was an airport near me and if I could meet the next day, Cantrell said. My red flags started going off. Fearing one of his enemies was trying to orchestrate an elaborate setup, Cantrell told Musk to meet him at the Salt Lake City airport, where he would rent a conference room near the Delta Lounge. I wanted him to meet me behind security so he couldn't pack a gun, Cantrell said. When the meeting finally took place, Musk and Cantrell hit it off. Musk rolled out his "humans need to become a multiplanetary species" speech, and Cantrell said that if Musk was really serious, he'd be willing to go to Russia again and help buy a rocket. In late October 2001, Musk, Cantrell, and Adeo Resi, Musk's friend from college, boarded a commercial flight to Moscow. Resi had been playing the role of Musk's guardian and trying to ascertain whether his best friend had started to lose his mind. Compilation videos of rockets exploding were made, and interventions were held with Musk's friends trying to talk him out of wasting his money. While these measures failed, Adeo went along to Russia to try to contain Musk as best as he could. Adeo would call me to the side and say, "What Elon is doing is insane. A philanthropic gesture. That's crazy," Cantrell said. He was seriously worried but was down with the trip. And why not? The men were heading to Russia at the height of its freewheeling post-Soviet days when rich guys could apparently buy space missiles on the open market. Team Musk would grow to include Mike Griffin and meet with the Russians 3 times over a period of 4 months. The group set up a few meetings with companies like NPO Lavitkin, which had made probes intended for Mars and Venus for the Russian Federal Space Agency, and Cosmotras, a commercial rocket launcher. The appointments all seemed to go the same way, following Russian decorum. The Russians, who often skipped breakfast, would ask to meet around 11 a.m. at their offices for an early lunch. Then there would be small talk for an hour or more as the meeting attendees picked over a spread of sandwiches, sausages, and, of course, vodka. At some point during this process, Griffin usually started to lose his patience. "He suffers fools very poorly," Cantrell said. "He's looking around and wondering when we're going to get down to fucking business." The answer was not soon. After lunch came a lengthy smoking and coffee drinking period. Once all of the tables were cleared, the Russian in charge would turn to Musk and ask, "What is it you're interested in buying?" The big windup may not have bothered Musk as much if the Russians had taken him more seriously. "They looked at us like we were not credible people," Cantrell said. "One of their chief designers spit on me and Elon because he thought we were full of shit." The most intense meeting occurred in an ornate, neglected, pre-revolutionary building near downtown Moscow. The vodka shots started to space. To America, while Musk sat on $20 million, which he hoped would be enough to buy 3 ICBMs that could be retooled to go to space. Buzzed from the vodka, Musk asked point blank how much a missile would cost. The reply, $8 million each. Musk counted, offering $8 million for 2. They sat there and looked at him, Cantrell said. And said something like, "Young boy. No." They also intimated that he didn't have the money. At this point, Musk had decided the Russians were either not serious about doing business or determined to part a dot-com millionaire from as much of his money as possible. He stormed out of the meeting. The Team Musk mood could not have been worse. It was near the end of February 2002, and they went outside to hail a cab and drove straight to the airport surrounded by the snow and wreck of the Moscow winter. Inside the cab, no one talked. Musk had come to Russia filled with optimism about putting on a great show for mankind and was now leaving exasperated and disappointed by human nature. The Russians were the only ones with rockets that could possibly fit within Musk's budget. "It was a long drive," Cantrell said. "We sat there in silence looking at the Russian peasants shopping in the snow. The somber mood lingered all the way to the plane until the drink cart arrived. You always feel particularly good when the wheels lift off in Moscow," Cantrell said. "It's like, my God. I made it." So, Griffin and I got drinks and clinked our glasses. Musk sat in the row in front of them typing on his computer. We're thinking, fucking nerd. What can he be doing now? At which point Musk wheeled around and flashed a spreadsheet he'd created. "Hey, guys," he said, "I think we can build this rocket ourselves." Griffin and Cantrell had downed a couple of drinks by this time and were too deflated to entertain a fantasy. They knew all too well the stories of gung-ho millionaires who thought they could conquer space only to lose their fortunes. Just the year before, Andrew Beale, a real estate and finance whiz in Texas, folded his aerospace company after having poured millions into a massive test site. "We're thinking, yeah, you and whose fucking army," Cantrell said. "But Elon says, no, I'm serious. I have this spreadsheet." Musk passed his laptop over to Griffin and Cantrell, and they were dumbfounded. The document detailed the costs of the materials needed to build, assemble, and launch a rocket. According to Musk's calculations, he could undercut existing launch companies by building a modest-sized rocket that would cater to a part of the market that specialized in carrying smaller satellites and research payloads to space. The spreadsheet also laid out the hypothetical performance characteristics of the rocket in fairly impressive detail. I said, Elon, where did you get this? Cantrell said. Musk had spent months studying the aerospace industry and the physics behind it. From Cantrell and others, he'd borrowed rocket propulsion elements, fundamentals of astrodynamics, and aerodynamics of gas turbine and rocket propulsion, along with several more seminal texts. Musk had reverted to his childhood state as a devourer of information and had emerged from this meditative process with the realization that rockets could and should be made much cheaper than what the Russians were offering. Forget the mice. Forget the plant with its own video feed growing, or possibly dying, en masse. Musk would inspire people to think about exploring space again by making it cheaper to explore space. As word traveled around the space community about Musk's plans, there was a collective ho-hum. People like Zubran had seen this show many times before. There was a string of zillionaires that got sold a good story by an engineer, Zubran said. Combine my brains and your money, and we can build a rocket ship that will be profitable and open up the space frontier. The techies usually ended up spending the rich guy's money for 2 years, and then the rich guy gets bored and shuts the thing down. With Elon, everyone gave a sigh and said, oh well. He could have spent $10 million to send up the mice, but instead he'll spend hundreds of millions and probably fail like all the others that preceded him. While well aware of the risks tied to starting a rocket company, Musk had at least one reason to think he might succeed where others had failed. That reason's name was Tom Mueller. Mueller grew up the son of a logger in the tidy Idaho town of St. Mary's, where he developed a reputation as an oddball. While the rest of the kids were outside exploring the woods in winter, Mueller stayed warm in the library reading books or watching Star Trek at his house. He also tinkered. Walking to grade school one day, Mueller discovered a smashed clock in an alley and turned it into a pet project. Each day, he fixed some part of the clock, a gear, a spring, until he got it working. A similar thing happened with the family's lawn mower, which Mueller disassembled one afternoon on the front lawn for fun. My dad came home and was so mad because he thought he'd have to buy a new mower, Mueller said. But I put it back together, and it ran. Mueller then got stuck on rockets. He started buying mail-order kits and following the instructions to build small rockets. Rather quickly, Mueller graduated to constructing his own devices. At the age of 12, he crafted a mock-up space shuttle that could be attached to a rocket, sent up into the air, and then glide back to the ground. For a science project a couple of years later, Mueller borrowed his dad's oxyacetylene welding equipment to make a rocket engine prototype. Mueller cooled the device by placing it upside down in a coffee can full of water. I could run it like that all day long, and invented equally creative ways to measure its performance. The machine was good enough for Mueller to win a couple of regional science fair competitions and end up at an international event. That's where I promptly got my ass kicked, Mueller said. Tall, lanky, and with a rectangular face, Mueller is an easygoing sort who muddled through college for a bit, teaching his friends how to make smoke bombs, and then eventually settled down and did well as a mechanical engineering student. Fresh out of college, he worked for Hughes Aircraft on satellites. It wasn't rockets, but it was close, and then went to TRW Space and Electronics. It was the latter half of the 1980s, and Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program had the space gearheads dreaming about kinetic weapons and all sorts of mayhem. At TRW, Mueller experimented with crazy types of propellants and oversaw the development of the company's TR-106 engine, a giant machine fueled by liquid oxygen and hydrogen. As a hobby, Mueller hung out with a couple hundred amateur rocketry buffs in the Reaction Research Society, a group formed in 1943 to encourage the building and firing of rockets. On the weekends, Mueller traveled out to the Mojave Desert with the other RRS members to push the limits of amateur machines. Mueller was one of the club's standouts, able to build things that actually worked, and could experiment with some of the more radical concepts that were quashed by his conservative bosses at TRW. His crowning achievement was an 80-pound engine that could produce 13,000 pounds of thrust and earned accolades as the world's largest liquid-fuel rocket engine built by an amateur. I still keep the rockets hanging in my garage, Mueller said. In January 2002, Mueller was hanging out in the workshop of John Garvey, who had left a job at the aerospace company McDonnell Douglas to start building his own rockets. Garvey's facility was in Huntington Beach, where he rented an industrial space about the size of a 6-car garage. The two men were fiddling around with the 80-pound engine when Garvey mentioned that a guy named Elon Musk might be stopping by. The amateur rocketry scene is tight, and it was Cantrell who recommended that Musk check out Garvey's workshop and see Mueller's designs. On a Sunday, Musk arrived with a pregnant Justine, wearing a stylish black leather trench coat and looking like a high-paid assassin. Mueller had the 80-pound engine on his shoulder and was trying to bolt it to a support structure when Musk began peppering him with questions. He asked me how much thrust it had, Mueller said. He wanted to know if I had ever worked on anything bigger. I told him that yeah, I'd worked on a 650,000-pound thrust engine at TRW and knew every part of it. Mueller set the engine down and tried to keep up with Musk's interrogation. How much would that big engine cost? Musk asked. Mueller told him TRW built it for about $12 million. Musk shot back, yeah, but how much could you really do it for? Mueller ended up chatting with Musk for hours. The next weekend, Mueller invited Musk to his house to continue their discussion. Musk knew he had found someone who really knew the ins and outs of making rockets. After that, Musk introduced Mueller to the rest of his roundtable of space experts and their stealthy meetings. The caliber of the people impressed Mueller, who had turned down past job offers from Beale and other budding space magnates because of their borderline insane ideas. Musk, by contrast, seemed to know what he was doing, weeding out the naysayers meeting by meeting and forming a crew of bright, committed engineers. Mueller had helped Musk fill out that spreadsheet around the performance and cost metrics of a new, low-cost rocket, and, along with the rest of Team Musk, had subsequently refined the idea. The rocket would not carry truck-sized satellites like some of the monster rockets flown by Boeing, Lockheed, the Russians, and other countries. Instead, Musk's rocket would be aimed at the lower end of the satellite market, and it could end up as ideal for an emerging class of smaller payloads that capitalized on the massive advances that had taken place in recent years in computing and electronics technology. The rocket would cater directly to a theory in the space industry that a whole new market might open for both commercial and research payloads if a company could drastically lower the price per launch and perform launches on a regular schedule. Musk relished the idea of being at the forefront of this trend and developing the workhorse of a new era in space. Of course, all of this was theoretical, and then, suddenly, it wasn't. PayPal had gone public in February with its shares shooting up 55%, and Musk knew that eBay wanted to buy the company as well. While noodling on the rocket idea, Musk's net worth had increased from tens of millions to hundreds of millions. In April 2002, Musk fully abandoned the publicity stunt idea and committed to building a commercial space venture. He pulled aside Cantrell, Griffin, Mueller, and Chris Thompson, an aerospace engineer at Boeing, and told the group, "I want to do this company. If you guys are in, let's do it." Griffin wanted to join but ended up declining when Musk rebuffed his request to live on the East Coast, and Cantrell only stuck around for a few months after this meeting, seeing the venture as too risky. Founded in June 2002, Space Exploration Technologies came to life in humble settings. Musk acquired an old warehouse at 1310 East Grand Avenue in El Segundo, a suburb of Los Angeles humming with the activity of the aerospace industry. The previous tenant of the 75,000 square foot building had done lots of shipping and had used the south side of the facility as a logistics depot, outfitting it with several receiving bays for delivery trucks. This allowed Musk to drive his silver McLaren right into the building. Beyond that, the surroundings was sparse, just a dusty floor in a 40-foot high ceiling with its wooden beams and insulation exposed and which curved at the top to give the place a hangar-like feel. The north side of the building was an office space with cubicles and room for about 50 people. During the first week of SpaceX's operations, delivery trucks showed up packed full of Dell laptops and printers and folding tables that would serve as the first desks. Musk walked over to one of the loading docks, rolled up the door, and offloaded the equipment himself. Musk had soon transformed the SpaceX office with what has become his signature factory aesthetic, a glossy epoxy coating applied over concrete on the floors, and a fresh coat of white paint slathered onto the walls. The white color scheme was intended to make the factory look clean and feel cheerful. Desks were interspersed around the factory so that Ivy League computer scientists and engineers designing the machines could sit with the welders and machinists building the hardware. This approach stood as SpaceX's first major break with traditional aerospace companies that prefer to cordon different engineering groups off from each other and typically separate engineers and machinists by thousands of miles by placing their factories in locations where real estate and labor run cheap. As the first dozen or so employees came to the offices, they were told that SpaceX's mission would be to emerge as the Southwest Airlines of space. SpaceX would build its own engines and then contract with suppliers for the other components of the rocket. The company would gain an edge over the competition by building a better, cheaper engine and by fine-tuning the assembly process to make rockets faster and cheaper than anyone else. This vision included the construction of a type of mobile launch vehicle that could travel to various sites, take the rocket from a horizontal to vertical position, and send it off to space. No muss, no fuss. SpaceX was meant to get so good at this process that it could do multiple launches a month, make money off each one, and never need to become a huge contractor dependent on government funds. SpaceX was to be America's attempt at a clean slate in the rocket business, a modernized reset. Musk felt that the space industry had not really evolved in about 50 years. The aerospace companies had little competition and tended to make supremely expensive products that achieved maximum performance. They were building a Ferrari for every launch when it was possible that a Honda Accord might do the trick. Musk, by contrast, would apply some of the startup techniques he'd learned in Silicon Valley to run SpaceX lean and fast and capitalize on the huge advances in computing power and materials that had taken place over the past couple of decades. As a private company, SpaceX would also avoid the waste and cost overruns associated with government contractors. Musk declared that SpaceX's first rocket would be called the Falcon 1, a nod to Star Wars' Millennium Falcon and his role as the architect of an exciting future. At a time when the cost of sending a 550-pound payload started at $30 million, he promised that the Falcon 1 would be able to carry a 1,400-pound payload for $6.9 million. Bound to his nature, Musk set an insanely ambitious timeline for all of this. One of the earliest SpaceX presentations suggested that the company would complete its first engine in May 2003, a second engine in June, the body of the rocket in July, and have everything assembled in August. A launch pad would then be prepared by September, and the first launch would take place in November 2003, or about 15 months after the company started. A trip to Mars was naturally slated for somewhere near the end of the decade. This was Musk, the logical, naive optimist, tabulating how long it should take people physically to perform all of this work. It's the baseline he expects of himself and one that his employees, with their human foibles, are in a never-ending struggle to match. As space enthusiasts started to learn about the new company, they didn't really obsess over whether Musk's delivery schedule sounded realistic or not. They were just thrilled that someone had decided to take the cheap and fast approach. Some members of the military had already been promoting the idea of giving the armed forces more aggressive space capabilities, or what they called responsive space. If a conflict broke out, the military wanted the ability to respond with purpose-built satellites for that mission. This would mean moving away from a model where it takes 10 years to build and deploy a satellite for a specific job. Instead, the military desired cheaper, smaller satellites that could be reconfigured through software and sent up on short notice, almost like disposable satellites. If we could pull that off, it would be really game-changing, said Pete Warden, a retired Air Force general, who met with Musk while serving as a consultant to the Defense Department. It could make our response in space similar to what we do on land, sea and in the air. Warden's job required him to look at radical technologies. While many of the people he encountered came off as eccentric dreamers, Musk seemed grounded, knowledgeable, and capable. I talked to people building ray guns and things in their garages. It was clear that Elon was different. He was a visionary who really understood the rocket technology, and I was impressed with him. Like the military, scientists wanted cheap, quick access to space and the ability to send up experiments and get data back on a regular basis. Some companies in the medical and consumer goods industries were also interested in rides to space to study how a lack of gravity affected the properties of their products. As good as a cheap launch vehicle sounded, the odds of a private citizen building one that worked were beyond remote. A quick search on YouTube for rocket explosions turns up thousands of compilation videos documenting US and Soviet launch disasters that have occurred over the decades. From 1957 to 1966, the United States alone tried to blast more than 400 rockets into orbit and about 100 of them crashed and burned. 5. The rockets used to transport things to space are mostly modified missiles developed through all of this trial and error and funded by billions upon billions of government dollars. SpaceX had the advantage of being able to learn from this past work and having a few people on staff that had overseen rocket projects at companies like Boeing and TRW. That said, the startup did not have a budget that could support a string of explosions. At best, SpaceX would have 3 or 4 shots at making the Falcon 1 work. People thought we were just crazy, Mueller said. At TRW, I had an army of people and government funding. Now we were going to make a low-cost rocket from scratch with a small team. People just didn't think it could be done. In July 2002, Musk was gripped by the excitement of this daring enterprise, and eBay made its aggressive move to buy PayPal for $1.5 billion. This deal gave Musk some liquidity and supplied him with more than $100 million to throw at SpaceX. With such a massive upfront investment, no one would be able to wrestle control of SpaceX away from Musk as they had done at Zip2 and PayPal. For the employees who had agreed to accompany Musk on this seemingly impossible journey, the windfall provided at least a couple of years of job security. The acquisition also upped Musk's profile and celebrity, which he could leverage to score meetings with top government officials and to sway suppliers. And then all of a sudden none of this seemed to matter. Justine had given birth to a son, Nevada Alexander Musk. He was 10 weeks old when, just as the eBay deal was announced, he died. The Musks had tucked Nevada in for a nap and placed the boy on his back as parents are taught to do. When they returned to check on him, he was no longer breathing and had suffered from what the doctors would term a sudden infant death syndrome-related incident. By the time the paramedics resuscitated him, he had been deprived of oxygen for so long that he was brain dead, Justine wrote in her article for Marie Claire. He spent 3 days on life support in a hospital in Orange County before we made the decision to take him off it. I held him in my arms when he died. Elon made it clear that he did not want to talk about Nevada's death. I didn't understand this, just as he didn't understand why I grieved openly, which he regarded as emotionally manipulative. I buried my feelings instead, coping with Nevada's death by making my first visit to an IVF clinic less than 2 months later. Elon and I plan to get pregnant again as swiftly as possible. Within the next 5 years, I gave birth to twins, then triplets. Later, Justine chalked up Musk's reaction to a defense mechanism that he'd learned from years of suffering as a kid. He doesn't do well in dark places, she told Esquire magazine. He's forward-moving, and I think it's a survival thing with him. Musk did open up to a couple of close friends and express the depth of his misery. But for the most part, Justine read her husband right. He didn't see the value in grieving publicly. It made me extremely sad to talk about it, Musk said. I'm not sure why I'd want to talk about extremely sad events. It does no good for the future. If you've got other kids and obligations, then wallowing in sadness does no good for anyone around you. I'm not sure what should be done in such situations. Following Nevada's death, Musk threw himself at SpaceX and rapidly expanded the company's goals. His conversations with aerospace contractors around possible work for SpaceX left Musk disenchanted. It sounded like they all charged a lot of money and worked slowly. The plan to integrate components made by these types of companies gave way to the decision to make as much as practical right at SpaceX. While drawing upon the ideas of many prior launch vehicle programs from Apollo to the X-34, fast-tracked, SpaceX is privately developing the entire Falcon rocket from the ground up, including both engines, the turbopump, the cryogenic tank structure and the guidance system, the company announced on its website. A ground-up internal development increases difficulty and the required investment, but no other path will achieve the needed improvement in the cost of access to space. The SpaceX executives Musk hired were an all-star crew. Mueller set to work right away building the 2 engines, Merlin and Kestrel, named after 2 types of Falcons. Chris Thompson, a one-time Marine who had managed the production of the Delta and Titan rockets at Boeing, joined as the Vice President of Operations. Tim Buzzer also came from Boeing, where he'd earned a reputation as one of the world's leading rocket testers. Steve Johnson, who had worked at JPL and at two commercial space companies, was tapped as the senior mechanical engineer. The aerospace engineer Hans Koenigsmann came on to develop the avionics, guidance, and control systems. Musk also recruited Gwynne Shotwell, an aerospace veteran who started as SpaceX's first salesperson and rose in the years that followed to be president and Musk's right-hand woman. These early days also marked the arrival of Mary Beth Brown, a legendary character in the lore of both SpaceX and Tesla. Brown, or MB, as everyone called her, became Musk's loyal assistant, establishing a real-life version of the relationship between Iron Man's Tony Stark and Pepper Potts. If Musk worked a 20-hour day, so too did Brown. Over the years, she brought Musk meals, set up his business appointments, arranged time with his children, picked out his clothes, dealt with press requests, and when necessary yanked Musk out of meetings to keep him on schedule. She would emerge as the only bridge between Musk and all of his interests and was an invaluable asset to the company's employees. Brown played a key role in developing SpaceX's early culture. She paid attention to small details like the office's red spaceship trash cans and helped balance the vibe around the office. When it came to matters related directly to Musk, Brown put on her firm countenance and no-nonsense attitude. The rest of the time she usually had a warm, broad smile and a disarming charm. It was always, "Oh, dear. How are you, dear?" recalled a SpaceX technician. Brown collected the weird emails that arrived for Musk and sent them out as Cook of the Week missives to make people laugh. One of the better entries included a pencil sketch of a lunar spacecraft that had a red spot on the page. The person who sent in the letter had circled the spot on his own drawing and then written, "What is that?" "Blood," next to it. In other letters there were plans for a perpetual motion machine and a proposal for a giant inflatable rabbit that could be used to plug oil spills. For a short time, Brown's duties extended to managing SpaceX's books and handling the flow of business in Musk's absence. She pretty much called the shots, the technician said. She would say, "This is what Elon would want." Her greatest gift, though, may have been reading Musk's moods. At both SpaceX and Tesla, Brown placed her desk a few feet in front of Musk's, so that people had to pass her before having a meeting with him. If someone needed to request permission to buy a big-ticket item, they would stop for a moment in front of Brown and wait for a nod to go see Musk or the shake-off to go away because Musk was having a bad day. This system of nods and shakes became particularly important during periods of romantic strife for Musk when his nerves were on edge more than usual. The rank-and-file engineers at SpaceX tended to be young, male overachievers. Musk would personally reach out to the aerospace departments of top colleges and inquire about the students who had finished with the best marks on their exams. It was not unusual for him to call the students in their dorm rooms and recruit them over the phone. "I thought it was a prank call," said Michael Colino, who heard from Musk while attending Stanford. "I did not believe for a minute that he had a rocket company." Once the students looked Musk up on the internet, selling them on SpaceX was easy. For the first time in years if not decades, young aeronautics wizards who pined to explore space had a really exciting company to latch onto in a path toward designing a rocket or even becoming an astronaut that did not require them to join a bureaucratic government contractor. As word of SpaceX's ambition spread, top engineers from Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Orbital Sciences with a high tolerance for risk fled to the upstart too. Throughout the first year at SpaceX, 1 or 2 new employees joined almost every week. Kevin Brogan was employee number 23 and came from TRW, where he'd been used to various internal policies blocking him from doing work. "I called it the country club," he said. Nobody did anything. Brogan started at SpaceX the day after his interview and was told to go hunting in the office for computer to use. "It was go to Fry's and get whatever you need and go to Staples and get a chair," Brogan said. He immediately felt in over his head and would work for 12 hours, drive home, sleep for 10 hours, and then head right back to the factory. "I was exhausted and out of shape mentally," he said. "But soon I loved it and got totally hooked." One of the first projects SpaceX decided to tackle was the construction of a gas generator, a machine not unlike a small rocket engine that produces hot gas. A desert town about 100 miles from Los Angeles, Mojave had become a hub for aerospace companies like Scaled Composites and XCOR. A lot of the aerospace projects were based out of the Mojave airport, where companies had their workshops and sent up all manner of cutting-edge airplanes and rockets. The SpaceX team fit right into this environment and borrowed a test stand from XCOR that was just about the perfect size to hold the gas generator. The first ignition run took place at 11 a.m. and lasted 90 seconds. The gas generator worked, but it had let out a billowing black smoke cloud that on this windless day parked right over the airport tower. The airport manager came down to the test area and lit into Mueller and buzzer. The airport official and some of the guys from XCOR who had been helping out urged the SpaceX engineers to take it easy and wait until the next day to run another test. Instead, Buzzer, a strong leader ready to put SpaceX's relentless ethos into play, coordinated a couple of trucks to pick up more fuel, talked the airport manager down, and got the test stand ready for another fire. In the days that followed, SpaceX's engineers perfected a routine that let them do multiple tests a day, an unheard of practice at the airport, and had the gas generator tuned to their liking after 2 weeks of work. They made a few more trips to Mojave and some other spots, including a test stand at Edwards Air Force Base and another in Mississippi. While on this countrywide rocketry tour, the SpaceX engineers came across a 300-acre test site in McGregor, Texas, a small city near the center of the state. They really liked the spot, and talked Musk into buying it. The Navy had tested rockets on the land years before, and so too had Andrew Beale before his aerospace company collapsed. After Beale saw it was going to cost him $300 million to develop a rocket capable of sending sizable satellites into orbit, he called it quits, leaving behind a lot of useful infrastructure for SpaceX, including a 3-story concrete tripod with legs as big around as redwood tree trunks, wrote journalist Michael Belfiore in Rocketeers, a book that captured the rise of a handful of private space companies. Jeremy Holman was one of the young engineers who soon found himself living in Texas and customizing the test site to SpaceX's needs. Holman exemplified the kind of recruit Musk wanted. He'd earned an aerospace engineering degree from Iowa State University and a master's in astronautical engineering from the University of Southern California. He'd spent a couple of years working as a test engineer at Boeing dealing with jets, rockets, and spacecraft. Asterisk. The stint at Boeing had left Holman unimpressed with big aerospace. His first day on the job came right as Boeing completed its merger with McDonnell Douglas. The resultant mammoth government contractor held a picnic to boost morale but ended up failing at even this simple exercise. The head of one of the departments gave a speech about it being one company with one vision and then added that the company was very cost-constrained, Holman said. He asked that everyone limit themselves to one piece of chicken. Things didn't improve much from there. Every project at Boeing felt large, cumbersome, and costly. So, when Musk came along selling radical change, Holman bit. I thought it was an opportunity I could not pass up, he said. At 23, Holman was young, single, and willing to give up any semblance of having a life in favor of working at SpaceX non-stop, and he became Mueller's second-in-command. Mueller had developed a pair of 3-dimensional computer models of the 2 engines he wanted to build. Merlin would be the engine for the first stage of the Falcon 1, which lifted it off the ground, and Kestrel would be the smaller engine used to power the upper, second stage of the rocket and guide it in space. Together, Holman and Mueller figured out which parts of the engine SpaceX would build at the factory and which parts it would try to buy. For the purchased parts, Holman had to head out to various machine shops and get quotes and delivery dates for the hardware. Quite often, the machinists told Holman that SpaceX's timelines were nuts. Others were more accommodating and would try to bend an existing product to SpaceX's needs instead of building something from scratch. Holman also found that creativity got him a long way. He discovered, for example, that changing the seals on some readily available car wash valves made them good enough to be used with rocket fuel. After SpaceX completed its first engine at the factory in California, Holman loaded it and mounds of other equipment into a U-Haul trailer. He hitched the U-Haul to the back of a white Hummer H2 and drove 4,000 pounds of gear * across Interstate 10 from Los Angeles to Texas and the test site. The arrival of the engine in Texas kicked off one of the great bonding exercises in SpaceX's history. Amid rattlesnakes, fire ants, isolation, and searing heat, the group led by Buzz and Mueller began the process of exploring every intricacy of the engines. It was a high-pressure slog full of explosions, or what the engineers politely called rapid and scheduled disassemblies, that would determine whether a small band of engineers really could match the effort and skill of nation-states. The SpaceX employees christened the sight in fitting fashion, downing a $1,200 bottle of Remy Martin cognac out of paper cups and passing a sobriety test on the drive back to the company apartments in the Hummer. From that point on, the trek from California to the test site became known as the Texas Cattle Haul. The SpaceX engineers would work for 10 days straight, come back to California for a weekend, and then head back. To ease the burden of travel, Musk sometimes let them use his private jet. It carried 6 people, Mueller said. Well, 7 if someone sat in the toilet, which happened all the time. While the Navy and Beale had left some testing apparatus, SpaceX had to build a large amount of custom gear. One of the largest of these structures was a horizontal test stand about 30 feet long, 15 feet wide, and 15 feet tall. Then there was the complementary vertical test stand that stood 2 stories high. When an engine needed to be fired, it would be fastened to one of the test stands, outfitted with sensors to collect data, and monitored via several cameras. The engineers took shelter in a bunker protected on one side by a dirt embankment. If something went wrong, they would look at feeds from the webcams or slowly lift one of the bunker's hatches to listen for any clues. The locals in town rarely complained about the noise, although the animals on nearby farms seemed less impressed. Cows have this natural defense mechanism where they gather and start running in a circle, Holman said. Every time we fired an engine, the cows scattered and then got in that circle with the younger ones placed in the middle. We set up a cow cam to watch them. Both Kestrel and Merlin came with challenges, and they were treated as alternating engineering exercises. We would run Merlin until we ran out of hardware or did something bad, Mueller said. Then we'd run Kestrel and there was never a shortage of things to do. For months, the SpaceX engineers arrived at the site at 8 a.m. and spent 12 hours there working on the engines before retiring to the Outback Steakhouse for dinner. Mueller had a particular knack for looking over test data and spotting some place where the engine ran hot or cold or had another flaw. He would call California and prescribe hardware changes, and engineers would refashion parts and send them off to Texas. Often the workers in Texas modified parts themselves using a mill and lathe that Mueller had brought out. Kestrel started out as a real dog, and one of my proudest moments was taking it from terrible to great performance with stuff we bought online and did in the machine shop, Mueller said. Some members of the Texas crew honed their skills to the point that they could build a test-worthy engine in 3 days. These same people were required to be adept at software. They'd pull an all-nighter building a turbo pump for the engine and then dig in the next night to retool a suite of applications used to control the engines. Holman did this type of work all the time and was an all-star, but he was not alone among this group of young, nimble engineers who crossed disciplines out of necessity and the spirit of adventure. There was an almost addictive quality to the experience, Holman said. You're 24 or 25 and they're trusting you with so much. It was very empowering. To get to space, the Merlin engine would need to burn for 180 seconds. That seemed like an eternity for the engineers at the outset of their stint in Texas, when the engine would burn for only a half second before it conked out. Sometimes Merlin vibrated too much during the tests. Sometimes it responded badly to a new material. Sometimes it cracked and needed major part upgrades, like moving from an aluminum manifold to a manifold made out of the more exotic Aconal, an alloy suited to extreme temperatures. On one occasion, a fuel valve refused to open properly and caused the whole engine to blow up. Another test gone wrong ended up with the whole test stand burning down. It usually came to Buzz and Mueller to make the unpleasant call back to Musk and recap the day's foibles. Elon had pretty good patience, Mueller said. I remember one time we had 2 test stands running and blew up 2 things in one day. I told Elon we could put another engine on there, but I was really frustrated and just tired and mad and was kinda short with Elon. I said, we can put another fucking thing on there, but I've blown up enough shit today. He said, okay, alright, that's fine. Just calm down. We'll do it again tomorrow. Co-workers in El Segundo later reported that Musk had been near tears during this call after hearing the frustration and agony in Mueller's voice. What Musk would not tolerate were excuses or the lack of a clear plan of attack. Holman was one of many engineers who arrived at this realization after facing one of Musk's trademark grillings. The worst call was the first one, Holman said. Something had gone wrong, and Elon asked me how long it would take to be operational again, and I didn't have an immediate answer. He said, "You need to. This is important to the company. Everything is riding on this. Why don't you have an answer?" He kept hitting me with pointed, direct questions. I thought it was more important to let him know quickly what happened, but I learned it was more important to have all the information. From time to time, Musk participated in the testing process firsthand. One of the more memorable examples of this came as SpaceX tried to perfect a cooling chamber for its engines. The company had bought several of these chambers at $75,000 a pop and needed to put them under pressure with water to gauge their ability to handle stress. During the initial test, one of the pricey chambers cracked. Then the second one broke in the same place. Musk ordered a third test, as the engineers looked on in horror. They thought the test might be putting the chamber under undue stress and that Musk was burning through essential equipment. When the third chamber cracked, Musk flew the hardware back to California, took it to the factory floor, and, with the help of some engineers, started to fill the chambers with an epoxy to see if it would seal them. "He's not afraid to get his hands dirty," Mueller said. "He's out there with his nice Italian shoes and clothes and has epoxy all over him." They were there all night and tested it again, and it broke anyway. Musk, clothes ruined, had decided the hardware was flawed, tested his hypothesis, and moved on quickly, asking the engineers to come up with a new solution. These incidents were all part of a trying but productive process. SpaceX had developed the feeling of a small, tight-knit family up against the world. In late 2002, the company had an empty warehouse. 1 year later, the facility looked like a real rocket factory. Working Merlin engines were arriving back from Texas, and being fed into an assembly line where machinists could connect them to the main body, or first stage, of the rocket. More stations were set up to link the first stage with the upper stage of the rocket. Cranes were placed on the floor to handle the heavy lifting of components, and blue metal transport tracks were positioned to guide the rocket's body through the factory from station to station. SpaceX had also started to build the fairing, or case, that protects payloads atop the rocket during launch and then opens up like a clam in space to let out the cargo. SpaceX had picked up a customer as well. According to Musk, its first rocket would launch in early 2004 from Vandenberg Air Force Base carrying a satellite called TACS-81 for the Department of Defense. With this goal looming, 12-hour days, 6 days a week were considered the norm, although many people worked longer than that for extended periods of time. Respites, as far as they existed, came around 8 p.m. On some weeknights when Musk would allow everyone to use their work computers to play first-person shooter video games like Quake 3 Arena and Counter-Strike against each other. At the appointed hour, the sound of guns loading would cascade throughout the office as close to 20 people armed themselves for battle. Musk, playing under the handle Random 9, often won the games, talking trash and blasting away his employees without mercy. "The CEO is there shooting at us with rockets and plasma guns," said Colino. "Worse, he's almost alarmingly good at these games and has insanely fast reactions. He knew all the tricks and how to sneak up on people." The pending launch ignited Musk's salesman instincts. He wanted to show the public what his tireless workers had accomplished and drum up some excitement around SpaceX. Musk decided to unveil a prototype of Falcon 1 to the public in December 2003. The company would haul the 7-story-high Falcon 1 across the country on a specially built rig and leave it, and the SpaceX mobile launch system, outside of the Federal Aviation Administration's headquarters in Washington, D.C. An accompanying press conference would make it clear to Washington that a modern, smarter, cheaper rocket maker had arrived. This marketing song and dance didn't sound sensible to SpaceX's engineers. They were working more than 100 hours per week to make the actual rocket that SpaceX would need to be in business. Musk wanted them to do that and build a slick-looking mock-up. Engineers were called back from Texas and assigned another ulcer-inducing deadline to craft this prop. "In my mind, it was a boondoggle," Holman said. "It wasn't advancing anything. In Elon's mind, it would get us a lot of backing from important people in the government. While making the prototype for the event, Holman experienced the full spectrum of highs and lows that came with working for Musk. The engineer had lost his regular glasses weeks earlier when they slipped off his face and fell down a flame duct at the Texas test site. Holman had since made do by wearing an old pair of prescription safety glasses, but they too were ruined when he scratched the lenses while trying to duck under an engine at the SpaceX factory. Without a spare moment to visit an optometrist, Holman started to feel his sanity fray. The long hours, the scratch, the publicity stunt, they were all too much. He vented about this in the factory one night, unaware that Musk stood nearby and could hear everything. 2 hours later, Mary Beth Brown appeared with an appointment card to see a LASIK eye surgery specialist. When Holman visited the doctor, he discovered that Musk had already agreed to pay for the surgery. Elon can be very demanding, but he'll make sure the obstacles in your way are removed, Holman said. Upon reflection, he also warmed to the long-term thinking behind Musk's Washington plan. I think he wanted to add an element of realism to SpaceX, and if you park a rocket in someone's front yard, it's hard to deny it, Holman said. The event in Washington ended up being well received, and just a few weeks after it took place, SpaceX made another astonishing announcement. Despite not having even flown a rocket yet, SpaceX revealed plans for a second rocket. Along with the Falcon 1, it would build the Falcon 5. Per the name, this rocket would have 5 engines and could carry more weight, 9,200 pounds, to low orbit around Earth. Crucially, the Falcon 5 could also theoretically reach the International Space Station for resupply missions, a capability that would open up SpaceX for some large NASA contracts. And, in a nod to Musk's obsession with safety, the rocket was said to be able to complete its missions even if 3 of the 5 engines failed, which was a level of added reliability that had not been seen in the market in decades. The only way to keep up with all of this work was to do what SpaceX had promised from the beginning: operate in the spirit of a Silicon Valley startup. Musk was always looking for brainy engineers who had not just done well at school but had done something exceptional with their talents. When he found someone good, Musk was relentless in courting him or her to come to SpaceX. Brian Gardner, for example, first met Musk at a space rave in the hangars at the Mojave Airport and a short while later started talking about a job. Gardner was having some of his academic work sponsored by Northrop Grumman. Elon said, "We'll buy them out," Gardner said. So, I emailed him my resume at 2:30 a.m., and he replied back in 30 minutes addressing everything I put in there point by point. He said, "When you interview, make sure you can talk concretely about what you do rather than use buzzwords." It floored me that he would take the time to do this. After being hired, Gardner was tasked with improving the system for testing the valves on the Merlin engine. There were dozens of valves, and it took 3 to 5 hours to manually test each one. 6 months later, Gardner had built an automated system for testing the valves in minutes. The testing machine tracked the valves individually, so that an engineer in Texas could request what the metrics had been on a specific part. I had been handed this red-headed stepchild that no one else wanted to deal with and established my engineering credibility, Gardner said. As the new hires arrived, SpaceX moved beyond its original building to fill up several buildings in the El Segundo complex. The engineers were running demanding software and rendering large graphics files and needed high-speed connections between all of these officers. But SpaceX had neighbors who were blocking an initiative to connect all of its buildings via fiber optic lines. Instead of taking the time to haggle with the other companies for right-of-way, the IT chief Brandon Spikes, who had worked with Musk at Zip2 and PayPal, came up with a quicker, more devious solution. A friend of his worked for the phone company and drew a diagram that demonstrated a way to squeeze a networking cable safely between the electricity cable and phone wires on a telephone pole. At 2 a.m., an off-the-books crew showed up with a cherry picker and ran fiber to the telephone poles and then ran cables straight to the SpaceX buildings. "We did that over a weekend instead of taking months to get permits," Spikes said. There was always this feeling that we were facing a sort of insurmountable challenge and that we had to band together to fight the good fight. SpaceX's landlord, Alex Lidow, chuckled when thinking back to all of the antics of Musk's team. "I know they did a lot of hanky stuff at night," he said. "They were smart, needed to get things done, and didn't always have time to wait for things like city permits." Musk never relented in asking his employees to do more and be better, whether it was at the office or during extracurricular activities. Part of Spike's duties included building custom gaming PCs for Musk's home that pushed their computational power to the limits and needed to be cooled with water running through a series of tubes inside the machines. When one of these gaming rigs kept breaking, Spikes figured out that Musk's mansion had dirty power lines and had a second, dedicated power circuit built for the gaming room to correct the problem. Doing this favor bought Spikes no special treatment. SpaceX's mail server crashed one time, and Elon word for word said, "Don't ever fucking let that happen again," Spikes said. He had a way of looking at you, a glare, and would keep looking at you until you understood him. Musk had tried to find contractors that could keep up with SpaceX's creativity and pace. Instead of always hitting up aerospace guys, for example, he located suppliers with similar experience from different fields. Early on, SpaceX needed someone to build the fuel tanks, essentially the main body of the rocket, and Musk ended up in the Midwest talking to companies that had made large metal agricultural tanks used in the dairy and food processing businesses. These suppliers also struggled to keep up with SpaceX's schedule, and Musk found himself flying across the country to pay visits, sometimes surprise ones, on the contractors to check on their progress. One such inspection took place at a company in Wisconsin called Spincraft. Musk and a couple of SpaceX employees flew his jet across the country and arrived late at night expecting to see a shift of workers doing extra duty to get the fuel tanks completed. When Musk discovered that Spincraft was well behind schedule, he turned to a Spincraft employee and informed him, "You're fucking us up the ass, and it doesn't feel good." David Schmitz was a general manager at Spincraft and said Musk earned a reputation as a fearsome negotiator who did indeed follow up on things personally. "If Elon was not happy, you knew it," Schmitz said. Things could get nasty. In the months that followed that meeting, SpaceX increased its internal welding capabilities so that it could make the fuel tanks in El Segundo and ditch Spincraft. Another salesman flew down to SpaceX to sell the company on some technology infrastructure equipment. He was doing the standard relationship building exercise practiced by salespeople for centuries. Show up, speak for a while, feel each other out, then start doing business down the road. Musk was having none of it. The guy comes in, and Elon asks him why they're meeting, Spikes said. He said, "To develop a relationship." Elon replied, "Okay. Nice to meet you," which basically meant, "Get the fuck out of my office." This guy had spent 4 hours traveling for what ended up as a 2-minute meeting. Elon just has no tolerance for that kind of stuff. Musk could be equally brisk with employees who were not hitting his standards. He would often say, "The longer you wait to fire someone, the longer it has been since you should have fired them," Spikes said. Most of the SpaceX employees were thrilled to be part of the company's adventure and tried not to let Musk's grueling demands and harsh behavior get to them. But there were some moments where Musk went too far. The engineering corps flew into a collective rage every time they caught Musk in the press claiming to have designed the Falcon rocket more or less by himself. Musk also hired a documentary crew to follow him around for a while. This audacious gesture really grated on the people toiling away in the SpaceX factory. They felt like Musk's ego had gotten the best of him and that he was presenting SpaceX as the conqueror of the aerospace industry when the company had yet to launch successfully. Employees who made detailed cases around what they saw as flaws in the Falcon 5 design or presented practical suggestions to get the Falcon 1 out the door more quickly were often ignored or worse. The treatment of staff was not good for long stretches of this era, said one engineer. Many good engineers, who everyone beside management felt were assets to the company, were forced out or simply fired outright after being blamed for things they hadn't done. The kiss of death was proving Elon wrong about something. Early 2004, when SpaceX had hoped to launch its rocket, came and went. The Merlin engine that Mueller and his team had built appeared to be among the most efficient rocket engines ever made. It was just taking longer than Musk had expected to pass tests needed to clear the engine for a launch. Finally, in the fall of 2004, the engines were burning consistently and meeting all their requirements. This meant that Mueller and his team could breathe easy and that everyone else at SpaceX should prepare to suffer. Mueller had spent SpaceX's entire existence as the critical path, the person holding up the company from achieving its next steps, working under Musk's scrutiny. With the engine ready, it was time for mass panic, Mueller said. No one else knew what it was like to be on critical path. Lots of people soon found out, as major problems abounded. The avionics, which included the electronics for the navigation, communication, and overall management of the rocket, turned into a nightmare. Seemingly trivial things like getting a flash storage drive to talk to the rocket's main computer failed for undetectable reasons. The software needed to manage the rocket also became a major burden. It's like anything else where you find out that the last 10% is where all the integration happens and things don't play together, Mueller said. This process went on for 6 months. Finally, in May 2005, SpaceX transported the rocket 180 miles north to Vandenberg Air Force Base for a test fire and completed a 5-second burn on the launch pad. Launching from Vandenberg would have been very convenient for SpaceX. The site is close to Los Angeles and has several launch pads to pick from. SpaceX, though, became an unwelcome guest. The Air Force gave the newcomer a cool welcome, and the people assigned to manage the launch sites did not go out of their way help SpaceX. Lockheed and Boeing, which fly $1 billion spy satellites for the military from Vandenberg, didn't care for SpaceX's presence either, in part because SpaceX represented a threat to their business and in part because the startup was mucking around near their precious cargo. As SpaceX started to move from the testing phase to the launch, it was told to get in line. They would have to wait months to launch. Even though they said we could fly, it was clear that we would not, said Gwynne Shotwell. Searching for a new site, Shotwell and Hans Koenigsmann put a Mercator projection of the world up on the wall and looked for a name they recognized along the equator, where the planet spins faster and gives rockets an added boost. The first name that jumped out was Kwajalein Island, or Kwaj, the largest island in an atoll between Guam and Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean and part of the Republic of the Marshall Islands. The spot registered with Shotwell because the U.S. Army had used it for decades as a missile test site. Shotwell looked up the name of a colonel at the test site and sent him an email, and 3 weeks later got a call back with the Army saying they would love to have SpaceX fly from the islands. In June 2005, SpaceX's engineers began to fill containers with their equipment to ship them to Kwaj. About 100 islands make up the Kwajalein Atoll. Many of them stretch for just a few hundred yards and are much longer than they are wide. From the air, the place looks like these beautiful beads on a string, said Pete Warden, who visited the site in his capacity as a Defense Department consultant. Most of the people in the area live on an island called eBay, while the U.S. military has taken over Kwajalein, the southernmost island, and turned it into part tropical paradise and part Dr. Evil's secret lair. The United States spent years lobbing its ICBMs from California at Kwaj and used the island to run experiments on its space weapons during the Star Wars period. Laser beams would be aimed at Kwaj from space in a bid to see if they were accurate and responsive enough to take out an ICBM hurtling toward the islands. The military presence resulted in a weird array of buildings including hulking, windowless trapezoidal concrete structures clearly conceived by someone who deals with death for a living. To get to Kwaj, the SpaceX employees either flew on Musk's jet or took commercial flights through Hawaii. The main accommodations were two-bedroom affairs on Kwajalein Island that looked more like dormitories than hotel rooms, with their military-issued dressers and desks. Any materials that the engineers needed had to be flown in on Musk's plane or were more often brought by boat from Hawaii or the mainland United States. Each day, the SpaceX crew gathered their gear and took a 45-minute boat ride to Omelek, a 7-acre palm tree and vegetation-covered island that would be transformed into their launch pad. Over the course of several months, a small team of people cleared the brush-poured concrete to support the launch pad, and converted a double-wide trailer into offices. The work was grueling and took place in soul-sapping humidity under a sun powerful enough to burn the skin through a t-shirt. Eventually, some of the workers preferred to spend the night on Omelek rather than make the journey through rough waters back to the main island. Some of the offices were turned into bedrooms with mattresses and cots, Holman said. Then we shipped over a very nice refrigerator and a good grill and plumbed in a shower. We tried to make it less like camping and more like living. The sun rose at 7 a.m. each day, and that's when the SpaceX team got to work. A series of meetings would take place with people listing what needed to get done, and debating solutions to lingering problems. As the large structures arrived, the workers placed the body of the rocket horizontally in a makeshift hangar and spent hours melding together all of its parts. There was always something to do, Holman said. If the engine wasn't a problem, then there was an avionics problem or software problem. By 7 p.m., the engineers wound down their work. One or two people would decide it was their night to cook, and they would make steak and potatoes and pasta, Holman said. We had a bunch of movies and a DVD player, and some of us did a lot of fishing off the docks. For many of the engineers, this was both a torturous and magical experience. At Boeing you could be comfortable, but that wasn't going to happen at SpaceX, said Walter Sims, a SpaceX tech expert who found time to get certified to dive while on Quaj. Every person on that island was a fucking star, and they were always holding seminars on radios or the engine. It was such an invigorating place. The engineers were constantly baffled by what Musk would fund and what he wouldn't. Back at headquarters, someone would ask to buy a $200,000 machine or pricey part that they deemed essential to Falcon 1's success, and Musk